I'm Alan, Director of DevRel at Anchore, and I'm joined for this webinar by Josh Bressers and Jason Redding. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. Before we start, if you have any questions, you can ping those in the Zoom Q&A section. You should find a little button for that at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to chat. Let us know if anything is unclear. If you want to ask any questions, please do at any point. These guys love to be interrupted with questions, and you can deep dive into anything with these guys. So that's enough from me. Let's throw over to you guys, the experts. Thanks very much.
All right, Jason, I'll let you go first.
Awesome. Great. Hey, everyone. My name is Jason Redding. I represent InfusionPoints. We are a cybersecurity firm based out of North Carolina. We work with a lot of customers who struggle with things like zero trust, things like FedRAMP, DoD, CMMC. So if it's all right with you, Josh, Alan, I'm going to hop into it.
Hold on. I'm
Oh.
going to introduce myself first.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Go ahead.
No, I know. It's exciting. I'm excited
Fun
for
stuff,
this one.
right?
It should be good. So anyway, hi everyone. I'm Josh. I'm the Vice President of Security here at Anchore. And just like Jason mentioned, we kind of work in the same sphere where we have a tool that someone like Jason then uses to help the customers meet their various compliance needs. And yeah, I kind of do a whole bunch of crazy security stuff here. It's a lot of fun, and I love doing webinars like this. I love talking to people like Jason. So I've got a ton of demo content teed up for today. So I can't wait. I'm chomping at the bit here. So take it away, Jason.
Awesome. Great. So I think before we hop into that demo content, I think it's good to set the stage. So Alan, you're free to advance to the next slide when you're ready. But um, this is what we're here for, right? What is zero trust? So I like to think of it, at least for this webinar's sake, when we talk about CMMC, we think of it in the context of the federal government. So zero trust, ultimately, it is a cybersecurity framework that assumes no implicit trust for any user, any device, any workload, whether this is inside of your boundary or outside of your boundary, thinking of your network. I like to think of us taking the approach that flips the old trust but verify mindset into a newer wave, and that's never trust and always verify, and continue to verify. So we see a lot of different definitions for zero trust, all seemingly the same, but I like to look at the core principles. We've already touched on two: never trust, always verify, but additionally, assuming a breach and verifying explicitly across all your layers. And those layers with zero trust, we think of it as your identities, your devices, applications, most importantly, your data, but also your infrastructure and your network. So, and really, zero trust is as much about continuous validation as it is about initial authentication. You're tracking every action, every request, and all the data accesses, and you're reevaluating that in real time, even before you're getting into the environment. And you base that upon the context you have, what risk scores you have, and the policies you have set. So I think of it, and a lot of us think of it as data first. Federal guidance says the same. DoD is emphasizing also protecting your data where it lives. So it's not just about securing your network, the security practices you have for your applications, but it's protecting that data. So I'll give an example briefly. I think it's good to touch on this given the tooling we're looking at with Anchore. But modern supply chain threats are making zero trust mandatory. For those that aren't aware, zero trust, it's huge. An example of what we're seeing too is we're seeing threat actors inject, for example, malicious code into a previously legitimate software update. But if you're implementing zero trust at that forefront, you have those mitigations in place. You require your verified, your signed, and your compliant workloads before you're even executing them. So that's something we're going to touch on more in detail. We're going to go through the Anchor tool here in a little bit, but it's good to know what zero trust is and how it sets the stage. But to wrap zero trust up, the end goal is measurable resilience. And zero trust helps quantify your reductions in attack surface. I think we're good to move to the next slide if you don't mind. So how does this relate to CMMC? So let's touch on CMMC briefly first. For those that aren't aware, it's your cybersecurity maturity model certification. And it's really just how you measure and certify your ability to protect CUI. How are you protecting your controlled, unclassified information? So you have that verification and certification component. So you can verify that you're not just claiming compliance, you're actually doing it. So we think of CMMC as 2 levels, or 3 levels, excuse me. You have your base level, your foundational, where your basic safeguarding comes into play. Then your second level, where you're really getting into protecting that CUI. And then your third level, the expert level, where you're protecting against advanced persistent threats. And that's ultimately it's just a prolonged and targeted cyber attack where your threat actor gains access into your network and you don't detect them and they remain undetected for a period of time. So we're going to be talking about how can we get in front of that? How can we get in front of those protections? Alan, we're not going to talk about CMMC a whole lot. You can go ahead and move to the next slide.
Can I add one
Sure.
point to that, Jason?
Sure.
And you know this better than I do, I suspect. But CMMC recently changed quite drastically because there used to be I think there were always the 3 levels, but the requirements, was it 2025 or was it 2024 that they made the changes?
It was this
it
year.
was
Yep.
it was this year. Okay, it was pretty substantial, which is
You
good,
went
right?
from, yes. Yeah, you went from version 1 to version 2.
Right.
A lot of changes within that. Yep.
And it's
Yeah.
just to meet the, I guess, universe we exist in now versus the one it was originally written for, which was a much quainter world.
It's exactly what NIST has recently done too, updating their 863. We
Yeah.
have to change compliance wise with the times. And I think that's exactly what CMMC 1 did to CMMC 2. You get that simplification between, I think it was previously 5 certification levels.
Right. That's
So
right. Yes.
you're getting a lot more detailed to the times. You're getting a lot more up to date. So yeah, great point. So Alan, I think we're good for this next slide. So before we get into the meat, I want to leave us with something, and it's the bridge between Zero Trust and CMMC. CMMC focuses on protecting your CUI, but that really overlaps with Zero Trust. And if you think Zero Trust first, that helps accelerate your CMMC compliance. So think of Zero Trust as our guiding principle. You're ensuring that every user, every device, and every workload is continuously earning that trust to access resources. And again, I keep harping prior to getting into the boundary because with supply chain, it becomes a lot more evident that we need to start thinking to the forefront. But it's really how you build security into your fabric of daily operations. My favorite quote that I've heard recently at a seminar was Zero Trust is how you operate, but CMMC is how you prove it. So I wanted to leave that there. But I think it's time we start talking the real tool, Josh.
Yeah.
Our customers often struggle with a lot of these things. Your big rocks, right? Configuration baselines, provenance, hardening, software component management, vuln remediation. Maybe we can hop into Anchore and see how we solve these challenges.
Yes, for sure. All right, Alan, can I share? All right, good. I'm going to share my screen. All right, that should be Anchor Enterprise. I can't see anyone or anything anymore because I've got everything over here. So if something pops up in the chat or someone has a question, Alan or Jason, just feel free to
Sure
jump
thing.
right in and interrupt, and we'll go from there. So I've got a script here that Jason was kind enough to give me a list of topics to kind of cover. So I'm just going to start out with the tool we're looking at. So this is the Anchor Enterprise Web UI, and it's kind of very common layout. You're used to, you got who I am. Of course, I'm running as admin because I'm a very good, secure demoer. But it solves a bunch of my problems. But then we've got kind of our tools over here on the side. We've got we're going to focus a lot on the images tab today, but we've got our initial dashboard where we can get a high level overview of what's going on. We have a new feature where you can import random SBOMs that we're not talking about today, but it is a fun thing. We have some webinars about that as well. And we're going to talk about some reports, some policies, kind of focus on the images. And then we also have a concept over here where we call it a context. This is where you can imagine you have different workspaces, and we're going to use all of those as we go to talk about some of what's going on. So I want to start with image provenance, which is a topic Jason and I started talking about. I was like, oh, this is really actually hard to do. And then Jason was like, oh, we don't have to cover it if you don't want to. I was like, no, this is exactly why we should talk about this. And so if you exist in the world of security today, you've almost certainly heard people talk about signing containers, signing artifacts, signing code, signing whatever, and they never tell you how to do it. And that's because it's really hard to do. And there's enormous problems. You hear about something like SigStore on a regular basis. One of my favorite bullet points I'll point out is there are a whole bunch of startups that started out saying, we're going to make SigStore easy to use. We're going to bring SigStore to the masses. None of them did it. They're all doing something else now. The reality is signing like image provenance, just artifact provenance, is really hard to do. And so the question I think I often ask and talk about is less about like how do we sign things? How do we do this certain activity versus what do I have today that I can meet this requirement with? Because the reality is if you create your goal of we're going to use, SigStore to sign all our stuff, you might be able to, but you're actually going to struggle and you're going to have some potentially insurmountable problems. Like SigStore solves the signature issue, it doesn't solve the identity issue. And that's a talk in itself. We're not going to cover today. But anyway, all right, I've talked enough. So let's just kind of dig right in here. So I wanted to start out by just showing some of the things we have available to us right now around provenance of the artifacts we're dealing with. And so you can imagine we have a system like Anchor Enterprise, and the basic idea is that in our context, we're going to focus on containers, but we can, kind of add a container image. These are all things I've added from the Docker registry, docker.io. And then these are, of course, images I created, but you can import, like Debian images. We could, import like an Alpine image, kind of whatever you want. And you can set this up to watch a repository where I could say like anytime anything changes inside this Debian repository, I want you to pull it down and scan it automatically. And so obviously the intention behind a lot of this is to automate everything, right? If we rely on humans to do things, humans forget and they get sick and they sleep and whatever. So we're going to let the robots do our work for us. But if we look at an image, I'm just going to pick on this particular image here. There are a handful of bits of information useful to us. We'll talk about what all these warnings and everything is in a little bit, but I want to start with the checksum, right? Every container image has a checksum, right? This is the checksum of the image. If you change the image, you change the checksum. So this is one of those instances where when you have a location, you can store protected data. For example, we're storing SBOMs in Anchor Enterprise. That's literally, the metadata we're storing. But we can look at things like what is the checksum of the container image? We can look at what is the checksum of files in the container image. If we're expecting to have certain packages installed, we can keep track of that. We have files on disk. We can keep track of the checksums of those files. And so the question I always ask is, I need to prove provenance, but like, why am I proving it? What am I doing? What does my evidence look like in this context? And quite often having a trusted source for checksums will meet a lot of provenance requirements, right? Now, it can go deeper than that, though, because just, keeping track of checksums is terrible. And I've got something I like to do here is, so in Anchor Enterprise, we have this concept we call policies. And right now, this is just our default policy. This is the one that gets shown, like just when you install Anchor Enterprise, this is the policy that everyone has automatically. And then you can make new ones. We have some available. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I created a bunch of different ones for this demo, but I created one called provenance. And the provenance policy, what this does is it looks at the base image of a container, because when you're using something like a container, you start with a base image. And in this particular example, this is a Debian base image. Well, this is the Debian image in this context, but you have this base image and then you put stuff on top of it, right? So one of the things we see that's very useful when we have people trying to show provenance and keep track of where their stuff is coming from is they'll create a policy that says, for example, if we go over here, I can show you in the policy editor, I've got this are my default policy, and I'm going to say that I am looking for, an ancestry. Oh, that's the wrong one. I'm sorry. I'll show you as it is. But if we look at this now, we can say that I've got my image. I'm going to apply my policy, and I'm not going to get a warning this time because I have a trusted base image that is being used by this. So what happens is I bring in my base images, the security team looks at them, they approve them, they say, yes, these are okay. And then this policy says, I want you to only let base images I know about to be used, right? So that's one of the ways we can kind of have that provenance discussion. We can make sure we understand what we're working with. Excuse me. Okay. So I also want to show one other piece of this that I'm going to switch to my other context. This is the vulnerability one, is where we'll spend most of our time today. And I have one other image to show, which is the Debian in here. This, oh, where did I put it? I have too many images in this one. Debian latest. No, I'm in the wrong place. Debian latest. Okay. Debian latest. And so we can look at this, and I have a policy I created called approved repo. And this is going to yell at me because what I'm saying here is you can only pull images from a certain repository. In this case, this image comes from the Docker repo, but I have a policy that says you can only pull things from the Red Hat registry, right? So then if we go and we look over here, for example, at a Red Hat image that we got, we're not going to have a failure, right? Because obviously we're pulling from an approved repo. So this is another one of those examples where you're controlling the source of the data you have, and then you can, in theory, it's trustworthy and you're keeping track of checksums. All right, Jason, I just covered like a ton of stuff. Do you have comments, questions?
I do.
Good. Good.
This is huge. I mean, one of the most direct zero trust applications in a containerized environment. If you're not containerized, then that's the future, but it's ensuring that only verified software runs. And that's exactly what we're doing. You maintain that chain of custody during your build so that can be applied to your deployment and runtime. And you're ensuring that only trusted and verified software runs in the environment. I mean, this is huge. And then you have that audit trail, which helps you prove you're doing what you're saying you're doing. And that's with containers, that's really hard to do sometimes when you don't have a tool, this good to show that interaction and that audit trail.
Yep. And I'm going to show you, actually, you just reminded me, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in my script I have here, but there's, you're talking about, tracking changes and keeping track of images and things like that. And there's a concept we call drift. And so what this is, for example, I've got a test image. I named it drift, so I wouldn't forget. But we have a thing we call the changelog, where we can look at, so in this instance, I should first clarify. So I've got my drift image, and there are two images. So one of the things that happens in the world of containers quite often is you will have a tag such as latest. And so if you install Debian latest, you get the latest tagged Debian container, except it changes because as soon as they upload a new container image, that has now latest. And so the idea being, for example, there are two container images with the tag drift in my test repo. So, but if we look at it, what happens then is we can start looking and saying what changed between these two images. And it's a lot of stuff, right? It's a lot of files, 13 changed, 316 files removed, 171 added. This is a ridiculously contrived example, but we can whittle it down and say, okay, so we look here and we see there were 2 packages added and 5 removed. So if I take away the removed, we can see that on this instance, I added the sudo package and the AppArmor package. AppArmor was picked up because I installed sudo. But then we can also turn that off and turn on removed, and we can see I removed the BSD games package when this is just all the stuff that came with it. But the purpose of this then is there are always going to be changes in our software, right? And we can keep an eye on what these are, and we can set up policy around how are we tracking changes. We can say things like no images, no packages should ever be added to this container, right? Changing them is okay, being we're upgrading things, for example, but there should never be an addition. There should never be a subtraction. And then we obviously have the robots paying attention to this. As your images are flowing through your environments, now you can keep track of what's going on. You can have the policy engine, fail things, warn you, show up in reports, kind of whatever you're looking for. And so drift is one of my favorite things just because it is hilarious when you look at what has changed in some of these images when you're just playing around with a tool like this. And it's just, some of it's head scratching, which is, YOLO, I guess. That's kind of the world of containers, right? All right. Jason, any comments before I go back to my script? You're on mute, I think, or I can't hear you.
I'm double muted.
Okay,
apologies.
All right.
Yeah, before we move on, you can tie this to change management too. Whenever you talk about container drift, it really undermines the principle of immutability. You're able, with Anchor, you're able to detect and prevent when you're comparing the runtime containers to their approved image baselines. That's huge. Huge as a feature.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, these are one of the challenges, right? I love the way containers work, but it can also be mind numbing sometimes when people just make crazy changes. And it's like, I have no idea what's going on. Okay.
Hey, Josh, I've got a question to throw at you.
Yeah.
So, once you've got Anchor Enterprise and you've got this really pretty GUI that you can click around, you could spend all day in there, but how do organizations enforce these policies in their pipelines? Not like with a human being sat there clicking buttons in a GUI, but how can they ensure that they're compliant in an automated fashion so you don't have to have a human in the mix?
Thank you, Alan. This was not a setup. I did not ask Alan to ask this question, but I'm really glad he did. Because so one of the things Anchor Enterprise has that is a marvelous feature is everything I'm doing, everything you watch, we have a command line utility called Anchor CTL, and we have an API. Everything you can do in the GUI, you can do in the API. And so what happens is if you're in a CI environment, for example, where you need to apply policy, you need to see what's happening. Like, is my policy failing? Am I getting warnings? Like, what's happening? What's going on in this environment? You can create gates then that you run Anchor CTL against your container image, against whatever the artifact is you're trying to do something with. And then you can, define, like, I want you, like, just fail the build if Anchor fails, or whatever. It is the best part about Anchor Enterprise is you can pretty much do anything you want because of how robust the API is. And I think sometimes the worst part about Anchor Enterprise is you can do anything you want because of how robust the API is. But yeah, that's a really good question. Everything you see me do, absolutely everything going on, our customers do far more with this using the command line tools and the APIs than they do in the GUI, generally speaking. And then obviously you have the robots on the back end using APIs and we've got GitHub Actions, we've got all the things for plugging this into your CI systems and making it do exactly what you want it to do. Which is important because, yes, having a human clicking around like I'm doing right now would be the least efficient use of anyone's time for handling container images. And it should also be said, like when we look at my container images, right, I got like a handful here. We have customers with literally millions of containers that are in use. Like once you surpass a page of containers, it's a lost cause, right? Like no one's dealing with that on a case-by-case basis. This is where we need to have all the automation, all the things. I mean, heck, I have maybe a dozen in here, and I've already gotten lost twice in this demo, right? And I literally have a script I'm filing that tells me where to click. So figure that one. Okay, I want to show off some of our vulnerability capabilities now for a little bit, because one of the things that always comes up anytime we're dealing with compliance standards, zero trust anything, vulnerability management is a hot topic right now, just because it's difficult and we've had a ton of weird problems around like NVD and CVE, and I'm sure there's more to come. And so what Anchor does is I can go down here into our system first, and we have what we call our like feeds list, right? And this is where we have all these feeds, we have all our vulnerability data that gets synced, and we have this is all open source actually, it's all in GitHub, but we have a repository of our vulnerability data, which we kind of pull in from a lot of places, we do some massaging on it. That then gets converted into a gripe database because the underlying vulnerability scanner in Anchor Enterprise is fundamentally our open source tool gripe. We have Sift and gripe. Sift makes SBOMs, gripe scans SBOMs for vulnerabilities. And then those are the foundations upon which we built this software. And so anyway, you can see like we've got our feeds here. We've got a lot of vulnerability sources. And so what happens then is we take those vulnerabilities, we use them to scan the images that we add into Anchor Enterprise, right? So you add fundamentally, what happens is you take an image, we generate an SBOM of it with Sift, like literally Sift, that then gets stored inside Anchor Enterprise. And then that SBOM is used for vulnerability scanning and policy enforcement. And now you might have noticed, like when I clicked this vulnerability tab, it's very quick. Like Anchor Enterprise is literally scanning the image at that moment when we click the button. We aren't like rescanning, well, I should say we're scanning the SBOM, right? So the vulnerabilities you're looking at here are the literal, like most up-to-date vulnerabilities you can have. And we see, like we scan, in this case, it's a UB9 image that's purposely a little old, so it's got some things in it. But to give you kind of an overview, we look at our vulnerability tab, we get a list of all the vulnerabilities. We've got some little buttons over here. We can take out like operating system vulnerabilities. In this case, because it's a Red Hat image, there are no non-operating system vulnerabilities, but there's things like show me only CVEs with fixes. There's this concept we call vendor only CVEs, where Red Hat will say, for example, we're not fixing this vulnerability ever. And so that's what that is we can just take those out of the list. In this instance, there's what, 10 of them, it looks like. But the rest of it is just stuff waiting for updates. So then obviously you've got your typical severity ratings. These are coming in this particular instance. They come from Red Hat. You can get them. They also come from NVD, depending upon the data source. And then obviously we look down here, we've got various package types. I'll show you I'll show you. I'm going to show you a doozy of a container in a minute. But in this instance, it's all Red Hat images. We can talk about when we saw the vulnerability, where it's coming from, the package. If there's a fix available, it will tell us. It'll tell us when we saw the fix. This is a compliance thing, right? I'm sure Jason can probably comment on this at length. But when you are following a compliance standard, there's often SLAs, right? Where if you find a vulnerability, you have to fix it in a certain amount of time.
Right.
Excuse me. Okay. And then obviously you can download the report. This also comes as CSV. We all know Excel runs the world of compliance. So you're putting it into a spreadsheet sooner or later. But yeah, and now I'm going to, I guess before I go on, Jason or Alan, is there anything you think I'm missing in this particular view that I should have touched on?
Maybe not something that you missed, but just a point tying it back to zero trust. I said something, one of the principles was assume breach. And when you at the forefront assume that you have vulnerabilities and they're always present, you have that continuous monitoring and you have that ability to remediate before it even gets into the boundary. So you have those continuous monitoring pieces on the registries, and it alert you when that image was, say, potentially it was previously clean, but whoops, now there's a new vuln on that image. You have that real life or real time data to act on. You have those alerts, you have those alarms. So
Yeah.
even after release, the minute a CVE is affecting your image, and you can go resolve that.
And that's a really good point, Jason. Is yes, it might be clean at build. It might pass your CI, and then 10 minutes later, the world changes. And in fact, I'll show you. I've got here's the test image. This was our log4j test image we put together way back in the day. And so this one is just a tire fire of problems, right? If we look at the vulnerability list, it is gigantic. It's 69 criticals because we took log4j and we shoved it into this thing every way we could possibly figure out to make it as we tried to trick the scanner. We couldn't, thank goodness, because it found all the weird instances, like jars and jars and jars and things like that. But this is a good example because this shows us, we've got our critical images, we got Java package, we got an Alpine package. This is a different thing, but then we can see it'll tell us where it is. Cause this is one of the challenges too, right? Where is the thing you're looking for found on the file system? Because okay, if it's an RPM package, that's easy to understand. But what happens when I have a developer that has a jar file that's, 36 directories deep, and I have to try to figure out where that thing is? And obviously, again, this is where having JSON and APIs and things like that are a little easier to deal with. But then we also show is there a fix available, right? In the case of log4j, yes, there is a fix available. And this is obviously helpful. The intent here is that you can use the available fix information to either, send this off. We have a workbench where you can just add things up and send it off to, a bug tracker, Jira, GitHub, something like that. With the obviously idea being here, developer, go do this thing. And this is such a good image though. It's such a tire fire.
So thanks for showing us that, Josh, because that actually ties in with the question we've just had from Michael in the audience, who says, do you have the ability to have an executive summary view where you can see all CVEs on all images that are tagged latest, or some way of slicing and dicing the data? So you could show all affected images under each CVE, grouped by CVE, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. So we have two views. We have the dashboard, which is going to show you, you can see, this is when I put this together, the demo together, but the dashboard just kind of shows you what's going on over time, right? What are your vulnerabilities, all the containers you got, The dashboard it'll show you compliance. In this instance, I don't have compliance alerts because I don't have the policy defined to do this, but there's this kind of general overview, and that's intended to be, I guess, sort of an executive summary. Excuse me. But then we also have a report functionality built into the tool. And this is where we can say something like, I want to look at an artifact by vulnerability, look at this ID and whatever. I don't even remember what is. We could type in like the log for J value and then set it up to run a report. And that gives you, the reports are nice because you can like look at the high level view in the tool, or you can actually, if I do critical images with critical vulnerabilities, here, I could just click that. And this is obviously a disaster. But then this is a report that you can look at. You can set it up to, if I hit save report, I can run it like daily, month, whatever. However you want to run it, it gets run. Then the report ends up getting saved. And then once it's saved and run, we can pull it out of the system as like a CSV file, for example, load it into a spreadsheet, load it into some other tool. You can come into this interface and like look at it and download it. It just kind of depends how you want to use it. We purposely made this like extremely flexible because we found the vast majority of customers we have were interested in extracting the data and putting it somewhere else in some sort of like larger dashboard, for example, that their executive leadership, their whoever was going to look at what's going on. And then obviously this is one of those instances. In fact, this is what I use at Anchore. We obviously run Anchore Enterprise to scan Anchore Enterprise, which amuses me every time I tell people this. But I have reports set up that like when there are critical vulnerabilities show up, like I'm going to take immediate action in that context. So
it's good to drink our own champagne, isn't it, Josh?
Yes.
So let me give you a break to drink a bit of that champagne while I ask Jason a question. So from Josh has talked about having policies to define your compliance. And from that compliance perspective, like there's been the push for the DoD zero trust, and that must have changed the conversation around security in federal agencies. And there must be some mindset change required because this is a new thing, right? It's a new mandate. Like, what's the biggest mindset shift required that you see, do you think?
I think we've touched on it briefly already. It's really managing your supply chain, getting these vulnerabilities before they get into your environment. So I think something that's cool with the Anchor tool to spin that question down, setting up policies before you deploy these images into your boundary. So you can say, and Josh, you know this more than I do, but so say different agencies have different risk appetites, different customers have different risk appetites. So the ability to set policies to prevent or block images with certain CVEs, high critical, what have you, whitelisting some things, defining an SLA. So that's the hugest thing too, is making sure that that SLA meets your federal requirements, meets your requirements you're getting from your agency. So being able to set that and configure that to be custom to your use case is huge. But when you're talking zero trust, it's really getting those vulnerabilities down from the beginning before you pull them into your environment. And that when we start to talk about CMMC too, and you tie it to these threats where they'll gain this access early on and maintain that access without a sound from any of your detection systems, being able to prevent that from happening in the first place. It happens with the images. It happens with your software. It all happens there. If you can prevent that from the beginning before it enters your environment or your network or your boundary, that's huge. So that's a lot what we're seeing is there's a lot more scrutiny on how you handle containers as a whole, and tools like Anchor really make it easy. It's not easy, but it assists in making it easier.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember FedRAMP a couple of years ago, you only had to scan the container host. You didn't have to scan any of the containers running on the host. And that felt weird, right? It's like the thing running them I have to pay attention to, but not the things actually running the code. But so Jason, you just reminded me of I'm gonna skip around a little bit. There's kind of an example here I want to show is, we're talking about having our policies and our compliance and kind of making sure things work. And this is like one of the things I love is like KEV, right? CISA has the known exploited vulnerabilities list where we can say like if something is on KEV, automatically fail. And that's an easy one where if in the vast majority of government, US government standards I've seen to date, it's basically like if something is on KEV, you just up and fail automatically. And so that's one of the things you can do is you can create a policy that says if this vulnerability is on KEV, like we're just going to fail it. And you can see like obviously the policy failed because we have in this instance it's a tire fire of a container. But I have a easier example, we'll say, and this kind of ties in with what my browser is not happy today. This ties into some of what Jason was just saying, where if we look at some of our images, and now I'm switching over to my the account, sorry, the context that is paying attention to my Kubernetes instances, right? Because this is one of the things we do is we have the ability to pay attention to what's actually running inside of your Kubernetes environments. And so I'm going to pick on this one here, and you can see like I've got two Kubernetes instances running. These are running in my basement, and the green and the red show me what is happening with the policies of the things running on there. And you can see like I'm not everything has been scanned by Anchor Enterprise, and I did that on purpose just to show it off kind of how it works, because obviously you're always going to have things that aren't necessarily scanned. Your goal would be to make sure these bars are all the way where you're scanning all your stuff. But this one is especially interesting where I have a container image that says it's failing the policy, right? And so the intent being that even if you made it into production, and this is, kind of that very trust continuous monitoring aspect, I made it into production, but now I have to actually pay attention to production. And one of the challenges we get, especially in the containerized world, especially in the Kubernetes world, where things are changing very, very quickly, is what am I actually running in production, right? Because if we look like over here in my image tab, I've got all these images I'm storing in Anchor Enterprise. But if we look in my Kubernetes tab, you can see I'm actually not running all of the images. I'm only running some of the images. And in this instance, we can say, okay, I have an image failing. Like we might have looked yesterday and we might have had all green. Now I've got some red. So I'm going to say, what is going on? Why is my red failing? And so we can click on our image here. This is obviously another contrived example, but we can see that I'm failing my image. So I go into the view that we've all seen. This is the policy compliance view. And we can see I've got one stop and a bunch of warns, right? And so this is kind of from the perspective of compliance. You can imagine, warns are things that you should do, right? Versus must do, versus stops are the must do. And like, so obviously, if we look at what's going on, what is our failure? Why is this happening? There are a couple of options. So one of the things you can do is we can go over here. We have an allow list, right? Where I can say, for example, like, I'm not going to fix this. Maybe I can't fix it right now for some reason. We've all had that problem, right? Where you can't fix it because you're rolling out a new feature tomorrow, or who knows, there's a million reasons. So we could say like just ignore this for a month, right? We can pick a time date. We can ignore it for days, weeks, months, kind of whatever you're looking for. We can take it off and say never come back vulnerability because this is like a false positive or something. Who knows? There's a million things. But then we add this to our allow list and now we're passing our policy. So like this is one of those examples where I, as an analyst, could look at something like a dashboard. I could look at a report. I could see this is failing. I could say, oh, crap, we have to fix this and we'll fix it. We push a new image. Now we'd start passing. Or if it's not something we can fix, we can add it to an allow list. And now we have kind of that ability to, keep the machine moving in the right direction by utilizing, an allow list, or we can take deny list. We can take it off the list later. We can let it expire. It just depends what you need to do because everyone's environment is different. All right, Jason, I feel like this one is just like red
Yeah.
meat.
Yeah, there's
Like,
a lot of tooling functionality here that you can tie for our folks that are familiar with FedRAMP. The continuous monitoring requirements. So with your lows and your moderates and your highs, you can tie this directly to your POAMs and how you manage these vulnerabilities. Like Josh
yep,
was saying, if there's
yep,
something that you just don't have time to remediate, that's fine. Let's put it in this bucket for now, put it in this policy. We have X amount of days to remediate, maybe 20, however many, whenever you got that scan from. But that's perfect to help maintain your day to day, but you also have that proof sitting down back here waiting for you. You still need to resolve this finding, but you can track it a lot easier than a typical tool.
yep,
Um,
yep.
no, that's great. That's huge. The policy exceptions, there's a lot of functionality there that can be taken advantage of within Anchor.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And it's one of the most used aspects of this, just because as soon as anyone, I mean, I used to do this work in a universe where we would have so many fails, it was no one even paid attention, right? Where you'd have 300 or 400 failing packages. And at that point, you're like, we're just going to throw our hands in the air and we give up. Like, we're done now. And that's the intent, right? Is by making it manageable, making it understandable, giving views into things like, our Kubernetes instances. We can understand what's running, what's happening. Because obviously, you can imagine if you have a million SBOMs stored in the system, but your Kubernetes cluster is running 100, those are very different problems to deal with. And so that's kind of the intention of things like this. And then we also have a thing called the Kubernetes admission controller that I do not have configured, so I cannot show it off today. But the idea is, excuse me, you have an image, you push it into your Kubernetes cluster, but before it lets it go in, the admission controller asks Anchor Enterprise, hey, like, is this legit? Did this pass the policy check? And if it doesn't, it won't let you deploy the image. So that's just
Always
another one of
verify.
those. Right,
Yep,
exactly.
always
Yep.
verify.
Exactly that. And so that's I do love that. Trust but verify, except nope, always verify.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. It makes perfect sense. Okay. What did we do? We did that. Okay. I want to touch on another thing that Jason mentioned and we haven't covered yet is the hardened base image. I think this is kind of the new hip thing we're hearing about from just the universe in general. And I want to kind of show that off a little bit. So I put together, I've got a couple of things, right? I showed this UBI 9 image from Red Hat, and it has a bunch of vulnerabilities. And I want to talk about this first. And so there's kind of two mindsets. So I'll set the stage by saying I worked at Red Hat for over a decade, some time ago. An enormous number of their security policies are quite literally my fault because I was there, like I was there 3,000 years ago, Gandalf. I was the group of people that did a lot of this work. And so what happens is there's this concept of the like minimal base image or I'll just call them fat containers, where you have more things inside the image. And in the case of Red Hat, what they do is Red Hat will analyze every single vulnerability. Like they still do this today. I know a lot of people who are still doing this work that are still there. Like they're good folks, they're really smart. I trust them. They have an enormous security team that does this work. They analyze the image and then they basically put it in a queue. Like you'll notice there's one high image. My suspicion, it says it was detected a day ago. I would not be surprised if I updated my image from Red Hat if there's a fix for this. Although it does say none, but my data might be old. But you get the idea, right? Where they release their updates, they do their thing, and the intent is they know what needs to be fixed in what order because they have a lot of vulnerabilities, so they try to fix them in a way that makes sense, but in a way that also it matters to their customers. I have another image from Debian that's kind of going to tell you a similar story. Where in this Debian image, there are kind of two, let me turn that on. There are two classifications of vulnerabilities, right? There's the vendor only, which is the won't fix, which you can't see because my screen isn't wide enough. Usually I have a giant screen so I can see all this at once, but that says won't fix. And like these are some images Debian said, we're never fixing these. And again, the Debian security team, they did an analysis. They said, these are not for, maybe they don't affect them. Maybe they're so minor. I don't know. It doesn't matter, right? Versus then they also have this concept called negligible, which is, I don't know, maybe not even a security issue. Again, it depends what Debian has done. I know a bunch of the Debian security people. They know what they're doing. They do an amazing job, right? But you can see like you have 45 findings here. I don't even remember what the Red Hat image had. I imagine it's somewhere in that neighborhood. 200 for this one. That's probably, I bet I broke something. Or I think I'm using an old image. Anyway, you get the idea. Now, let's look at something like, I grabbed Alpine in this case, just because Alpine is easy to look at. It's open source. But if we look at Alpine, there are 6 findings in this image, right? Like, that's it. And this is usually 0. In fact, I'm sad it's not 0 for this particular demo, but generally speaking, when you're talking about Alpine, it's small. But if we look at Alpine, we can look at the SBOM. If we look at the OS, there are 16 packages installed in a default Alpine image, right? Versus if we go look at the Debian image now, we're going to see not 16 packages. We can see there are 78 packages installed by default. And let's just look at Red Hat quick while we're here, because I suspect it's even more. And I should also add there is a UBI minimal image. I'm not using it on purpose for the purpose of this demo, so please don't judge Red Hat harshly for this. Yeah, they have 188 in this because they're taking that kind of fat container approach. So what happens now, and I'm sure Jason's chomping at the bit here. I'm almost done, man. But the goal is when you're in these, environments where you're regulated and you have to justify every vulnerability finding by using a minimal hardened container image that has 6 or 0 or 2 vulnerabilities, that's a lot less work than trying to justify 40 or 100 or some other number, right? Because every time you have a vulnerability, you often have to justify it in some meaningful way. All right, Jason, what'd I miss?
I don't think you missed anything, but I will add. We this is the hardest thing. It's having a hardened image that is you can prove that it's signed. However, we've touched on signing and verification and provenance, but making sure it's trusted. So using these hardened base images and being able to double click into some of these things and justify some of these reasons or policies that you're using, it's extremely important. And you have the reports. You show the different workloads that are derived and approved from the base hardened images that you have and you're storing in Anchor. And that's what we see a lot of auditors ask. Hey, yeah, are you using XYZ hardened image? Can you show us? Can you verify? Can you verify that from start out of the boundary into the environment at runtime and continuously? How do you validate that? And here, all your proof is here. It really is. You have that validation against your benchmarks.
Yep.
You can show the
Yep.
policies. You can click into that. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, this is extremely important stuff. And this is again, I keep saying this, but this is your easy button. It really is.
Yeah. 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 It's
I
all
have
about the
a
evidence, right?
Sorry,
Alan,
Josh.
go.
Sorry,
No,
chaps.
please
I have
go
a
ahead. Go ahead.
question from the audience. Chris has asked, this sounds like a challenging technical question. I've witnessed differing image digests when an image is analyzed from the Docker daemon versus from the registry. How can we maintain provenance when this happens?
This is a known bug in the Docker. I don't know if they call it a bug, but it is when Docker stores an image in Docker Hub, it has a different digest than once it gets pulled. And I don't remember off the top of my head. There's a reason for this, and it drives me nuts. But yes, that is definitely one of the concerns you need to have. And there is I can't remember for the life of me how to unwind that. I can, if you like, uh, I will follow up with you afterwards because there's some technical reason for this. And I don't remember exactly what we do about it, but I know I've had this conversation, but it's been a long time. But yes, that is an annoyance for sure that the Docker Hub checksum is not the Docker desktop checksum.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm going to add one other thing that kind of to build on what Jason was just talking about, which is like when you are in a regulated environment, like trust me never works, right? Like you need the evidence. You have to show that. And it's also worth noting that the whole hardened container image, the reason I use Alpine is because there are a ton of companies that are starting to offer these hardened images. And I don't want to like pick one or show favoritism to anyone, but it is definitely becoming a thing. All right.
100%.
And yeah, you said Jason, like, so I didn't know this. Auditors are actually asking about hardened images specifically now.
100%. That's exactly what we see. We're also seeing a lot about SBOMs, showing proof of SBOMs,
Yeah.
grabbing these libraries. Where are they coming from? How are you validating them? I mean, it's huge. Yeah. With latest updates to NIST 853 with Rev 5, talking more about hardened images and how those are getting into the environment, being able to trace that and track that. We see auditors asking more and more for evidence on how you're doing that. It's no longer trust us, here's a spreadsheet where we track everything. It's all here, but they want to see the real time. Where are you pulling this from? How are you building off of this image, this hardened image? What are you applying to this? What packages, what are you applying to this image? Making sure your vulnerability counts are low or dare I say non-existent. But in that point in time, how are you tracking those vulnerabilities? How are you tying them to that image? If you have an image that has this amount of vulnerabilities, show us that, walk us through that. And I think the policies you can set up with an Anchor, you can tie directly to, say, a POAM for FedRAMP. When a lot of these
Yep.
vulnerabilities that aren't getting resolved due to X reason, you need that explanation and you have to document it. So there's never a clean environment. So being able to back up your claims
Yeah.
is important. It's really important.
I mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head, man, with saying there's never a clean environment. I think that's something I know as a security person, I forget that sometimes of like, it doesn't matter what we do. Like, you're almost, even if there are no findings, which has literally never happened to me. But even if there weren't any, there's going to be some tomorrow, right? Like just
Yes.
things change, and that's the way it is. And I want to kind of I'm going to close on just to kind of show off some of the things Jason just mentioned, where you're talking about understanding provenance and where things come from and what you have. And obviously we have the SBOM button in Anchor Enterprise, and so this is where you can download your SBOM. So if your auditor wants an SBOM, we support SPDX and CycloneDX. We have a thing we call native. Native is not meant to be distributed to an auditor or a customer or anyone like that. Native is our kind of like internal SBOM format, which we had to create because SPDX and CycloneDX, like you can't convert from one to the other. So we basically made a third SBOM format that's all the things in both of them put together, but never give that to anyone. It only exists to output these two things. So you can obviously output SBOMs for the thing you have, because the SBOM is what we are storing inside the system. We're not storing container images. Like one of the really cool uses, and this happened during Log4j, is we had a customer that had been running Anchor Enterprise for multiple years, and they asked the question, like, where have we ever had Log4j running in our environment? And they had multiple years of SBOMs where they didn't have their container images, they didn't have all their artifacts going back in time, but they had all the SBOMs because SBOMs are small and you can store them easily versus, storing containers forever gets expensive and annoying, and no one wants that. We also capture a whole bunch of metadata. Oh, that's right. This is where we store the different digests in the system between the Docker hub and the non-Docker hub image for a container. That's right. I remember this now. But this is where we talk about, like what is the image we're dealing with here? Where did it come from? We classify operating systems when we can. So we have a number of operating systems we support, right? Like Debian and Ubuntu and Red Hat and Alpine and ChainGuard and all kinds of them like that. And so this is where we can start seeing like what is happening in this image. And of course, all this metadata is inside the SBOM, right? We can unwind this. We can look at, where do things come from? There's no ancestry because this is the Alpine base image, but you can imagine that here, let me pick on one of my images that does have ancestry, and we can look at, we ran out of time. I didn't even get to like secret scanning and malware scanning of these images yet, but that's all right. That's all right. We can look, the ancestry is not working because I screwed this one up. It doesn't matter, right? You get the idea. There is so much going on with these images, and having tooling is the only way we can get a handle on any of this. And so, all right, we are pretty much out of time. I want to save a couple minutes at the end here for, I guess, closing thoughts from Jason as well as questions from the audience. But I've done like a ton of talking here, so I want to thank everyone for putting up with me, and thank you, Jason, for your commentary. It's been invaluable.
Awesome. Yeah. Before we tie off of the SBOMs, I want to leave us with a note here. It's the provenance. You help prove that only
Yeah.
authorized and secure components are reaching
Yep.
production. And again, I keep saying this, but a lot of resisting these threats, it happens outside of the boundary before you're even putting anything into the boundary. So this is why a tool such as Anchore is so important, because you're checking all of these boxes natively for zero trust. And that applies to many different compliance frameworks, your FedRAMP customers, your DoD customers. It's really hitting it all home. So I just wanted to add that, Josh.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. And I forget that a lot of times. I get into the technical details and I get all excited about, scanning Kubernetes or whatever. But yeah, you're right. Like the provenance is everything. It's evidence fundamentally, right? It's just I
Yep.
have to show my auditor what's going on. And sometimes it makes me sad that I feel like that's all like they care about, but at the same time, like I get it because it matters and it's important. And it's never been easier. I mean, heck, man, I know you lack the years I do, but I remember back in the day, like it was literally paper binders we were using for this stuff. So thank goodness that's over.
Oh man, I couldn't imagine.
It was it was bananas. Bananas for sure. Yes. Now we use Excel spreadsheets, which is probably better. But that's all
Slightly.
right. That's all right. All right. Do we have any questions? We got a few more minutes before
No,
we're at the top of
I
the
had
hour.
one final question I was going to ask, but you both beat me to it, which is like the final takeaway message that people should take, and I feel like provenance is the takeaway word of the day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. For
Definitely.
sure. And I mean, I'll add one other thing to that is so right now when we talk about provenance, it's way back at the very beginning when I started doing this, we were showing off, having the ability to look at checksums, look at, where did the container image come from? What is like the base image it's built off of? What does the ancestry look like? What is going on? Like we can look at build summaries here. It shows us how many layers are in this image, is all that. But like the things like, proper cryptographic signatures, they are coming. This is going to be a thing that happens. We're going to see, you're going to need an SBOM that has been signed by a service. You're going to be able to verify that. You're going to have container images signed by services. You're going to see artifacts you download signed by services. We're not there yet. There's still some difficult things we have to solve, but like we're closer than we've ever been. And so it's definitely something to always keep in the back of your mind is like that is a thing that is going to happen. Now, as a security nerd who's been like harping about this for literally decades at this point, like I'm very excited. I feel like I've been saying next year for 20 years, but I feel like it's not next year, but I think we're pretty close.
It's tough. It really is tough. Containers are difficult, especially when you start
Yeah.
getting into these frameworks and compliance levels where they require this level of depth. And I
Yep.
think to reach zero trust, you have to go that deep. You really
Yes.
do,
Yes.
to the source, prior to the source. So
100%. All right. I'm going to unshare my screen.
well, I will say one final thank you to both of you, Jason and Josh. And what's the best way for people to reach out if they have any further questions or they want to know more? Should I just send everyone to your LinkedIn pages, or what's the
yeah,
best
please do.
next
Yeah.
step?
100%. Yeah. Thank you, Anchor, for having us on. Again, I'm from InfusionPoints. We deal with customers like this on a daily basis that have these issues, and we see Anchor as a one-stop shop for a lot of these solutions. So happy to open up a conversation, formal or informal. Yeah, just reach out to my LinkedIn, or if you have any other questions about CMMC or Zero Trust, you can always reach out to infusionpoints.com for more information.
Awesome. Yeah. And to follow up on that, just as a general housekeeping, you should get the slides. Well, I mean, there's a couple slides, but the recording at the very least should show up in an email at some point in the near future for you. But yeah, if you want to find me on, LinkedIn or Mastodon or whatever, like I love talking about this stuff. We'll talk your ear off. So it's a ton of fun. So yeah,
But Josh
thank you,
knows a
everyone.
lot, so take
Well,
advantage.
I know enough. I have the benefit of old age on my side. But yeah,
Wonderful
no,
stuff.
this has been great. Thank you, Jason. This is a treat, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. We'll have to do another one
Mm.
soon.
And I want to thank
Thank you both.
Alan for wrangling all of this because
Couldn't do it without
having
him.
having Alan's help, yes, it would have been a difficult and we'll say enrage-filled process of trying to keep track of
No,
everything.
not at all. Not at
Yeah,
all.
right, right. So
Anytime, anytime. See you with the next one. Thanks,
awesome.
everyone.
Yep, thank
Thank you
you.
both.
Thank you all for joining.